Good morning and welcome to Daf Yevamos, Daf Gimel number 3. Here we go with tremendous new Daf. We will be discussing in the Emet Ben Sion portion, which again is a separate video. We'll be discussing what an extension of what we discussed yesterday, a continuation where we discussed the idea behind this Mishnah, the first Mishnah, how Yibum b'makom erva. It's basically an essay. Eino dochel lo seish from akares. What is the explanation? Is the explanation there's no mitzvah at all of Yibum, or there is a mitzvah, just you're stuck. And the Chamr Oker Dar B'Shev Al Tase. That was basically the discussion yesterday. We'll be fitting it into the lashon of the Gemara on Daf Gimel, and we're going with that. Today's Daf is going to explore really the makor, the source, or the first source for the ruling in our first Mishnah that there is no mitzvah of Yibum, or that you're not supposed to do the mitzvah of Yibum b'makom kares, and that the Sarah, the rival wife of your brother's deceased wife, is also ptura from Yibum and Chalitza. The Gemara says on Beis Mid Beis, towards the bottom, start from there. The Gemara says, Mifti, Kulu Me'achas Yishri Alfinan. All these 15 arayos we learned out, we're going to stand up Gimel, learned out from the pasuk that talks about the erva of your wife's sister. You can't marry your wife's sister. Listen to Achos Yisha Bereisha. Say Achos Yisha. Say your wife's sister first. That should be the first case in the Mishnah. We should talk about your wife's sister first. That's the one from the pasuk where we learn everything out from. Maybe you'll say the Mishnah listed things in order of their chomer, in order of what's more chomer, meaning certain arayos in the Mishnah you only get kares. Certain arayos the punishment actually is sreifa, you get burned. They put a piece of burning lead down your throat, or they electrocute you, whatever you say. And the worst punishment is stoning. That you get by your daughter-in-law. So maybe Chumri says Bas, your daughter first. Rabbi Shimon, our mission is Rabbi Shimon, the Amar Sreifa Chamura, and the reason being that your Bas, your daughter, is the first case is because Rabbi Shimon argues on the Rabbanan. He says that the worst type of capital punishment is actually getting burnt, electrocuted, burnt. Say your mother-in-law in the beginning, the Ikar Sreifa, but Chamosa Ksiva, really, it doesn't say in the Torah actually, Bas, that you get Sreifa. It actually, we'll see on the Gemara Daf Gimel, it talks about your mother-in-law, V'od Bita, Basar Chamoso, Lisni Kalaso. And after Chamoso, where it talks about all the Isurim of Sreifa, which total 9 people, 9 of the cases in the Mishnah, the 10th case should be Kalasa, which is Skila, the Basar Sreifa, Skila Chamura. And because that's skila, and the last 5 are just kares. There's no capital punishment for them. El biso, the Gemara says, came in the Asim Drasha. It comes out of a drasha. It comes out of Rabbanan, derived it out of exegesis. They darshaned it. It wasn't explicit in the Torah. Chavivole, the Torah or the Tana, it was dear to him because he had to learn it out from a limud. He had to delve into it a little iyun. So where it says on the top of Daf Gilman Aleph, Kulanami Drasha Asu, all of the cases in our Mishnah come out of the Drasha. They kind of the Drasha we learn from Achos Isha. There's no mitzvah yibum. There is no yibum b'makom erva. And also the Sarah is ptura. That also from Drasha. Where it says Nidal Indian yibum asim Drasha. They're all learned out of Drasha. Ikar Yisurayu behed yaksibuhu. The fact that they're asr in the first place, nothing to do with Yibum, the fact that these arayas are asr, that's explicit in the Torah. Ikar Yisraya, Bito, Ikar Yisura Midrasha. The fact that your daughter, you can't marry your daughter or can't cohabit with your daughter, is learned out of a drasha. The Amar Rava, Amar Li Rabbi Yisrael Bar Avdimi, Aska Heina, Aska Zima Zima. We learn like 2 Zerashas. One is for the Isra, one is for the punishment of Sreifa. These psukim, one pasuk talks about, obviously one of the pasuk by your daughter, it says Heina and Zima, but also Heina and Zima are mentioned when it comes to the Isra of marrying a mother and her daughter, or a mother and a granddaughter. You can't be married to a mother and her daughter, or a mother and a granddaughter, separated by 2 generations at the same time. That's an Isra in the Torah. We learn also, it says in the Torah that if you rape somebody, you can't marry the granddaughter. So, uh, which is your granddaughter. So the fact that normally you can't marry anyone else, a regular woman who's not your daughter, you can't marry a woman and her granddaughter. So we learn also that just like you can't marry your own granddaughter, you also can't marry your own granddaughter and your daughter. Hena is to tell me the Isser, Zima is to tell me the punishment of Sreifa, Hashda, and Karis. Hashda, the Amr is called Milsa, the Asim, Drosha, Chavivule. Once you're telling me that everything that comes from a drasha is dear to the Tana, listen, Achosisha Lebasof. Say Achosisha at the end, the Iri, ID, the Iri, Isser, fine. Say Achosisha at the end because that, even the idea of Yibum, we learn now that there's no Makom Mitzvah of Yibum, the content of the first mission, no Mitzvah of Yibum, Makom Erba, that is explicit in the Torah only by Achosisha, so that's the only one thing explicit. So the Gemara backtracks for a second. The Gemara says, I did Ari B'Isra Achvasa Tana Achos Isha. Since they're already talking about that bubble, that section of the mission was talking about sisters, right? Your mother's sister and your sister that you share a mother with, the 13th case, I think. So therefore, the 12th case, therefore, or the 13th case, therefore, we also include Achos Ishto, which is a sister also, a sister of your wife. Listen to Lahai Bubble Basof. Why don't you say that the category, the last three, this category of sisters, of three sisters, why do you say that? So the Gemara is dealt a blow, and the Gemara has to retract. The reason Bito is mentioned first is because she's the closest blood relative to you. Tana Bito, Bas. But no, it first teaches your daughter. Once it teaches your daughter, it teaches your granddaughter from both your son and your daughter. Which also are blood relative to Krovi Atzmo, but I did Hana Shlosha Doros Lamata Diday, just once it talks about the three generations directly below you, your daughter and your granddaughter, Tananami Shlosha Doros Lamata Diday, it also teaches the three generations between below your wife, right? You can't marry your wife and her daughter and her granddaughter. I did Hana Shlosha Doros Lamata Diday, once it says three generations beneath your wife, Tana Shlosha Doros Lamala Dida. Therefore, it also teaches the three generations above your wife, meaning your mother-in-law and your mother-in-law's mother and your father-in-law's mother. Tana Achosa Va'achos Imo Dekrove Atzmo. And then it teaches your sister and your mother's sister that your Krove Atzmo, that are blood relatives. Once it's talking about sisters, Tana Achos Ishta. Right, your wife's sister's not your blood relative, but we're talking about sisters. So you said also we should have really put the daughter-in-law, the last case in the Mishnah, before again is a case where your brother married a wife and he died, and then you were born after it. Right, she wasn't married to your brother in your lifetime. It's not because of korva, it's just because they weren't in the same role together. Your brother wasn't married to her when you were alive. Once we're talking about brothers, so we talk about sisters and brothers, we talk about your brother. That's related to the fact that you're not really, in a sense, brothers. You weren't alive at the same time. And then it teaches about your daughter-in-law, which has nothing to do with brother and sister. Why does it say, this is going to be the subject of Yom Ben Sion, why does it say potros? What's the lashon of poter? It exempts the Mishnah, listening to ostros. A more correct term to be used would be ostros, because not only is there a p'tur that you don't have to do yibum, but it's isser. Ostros, like Rashi says over here, isser eishasach. You're not allowed to marry your brother's wife, even though there's mitzvah of yibum. There's an isser of an erva. So the Gemara says, "Itana ostros hamina asher liyabim." I would have said it's asher liyabim. It would just imply you can't do yibum, michlas chalta, but you would be required to do chalitza. Chalitza would be a way of relieving the situation, right? You can't do the mitzvah of yibum because it's an erva, but you can do chalitza. Chalitza breaks away the zika. Kamash malan, you don't even have to do chalitza. But listening to asura lachlos. Why doesn't it say it's not only asur to yibum, it's asur lichlos? Tell me you don't have to do chalitza. So the Gemara says, if you said asur chalitza, my ka'avid, what's the problem doing chalitza? Chalitza, you're not doing an avera, but doing chalitza. So the Gemara says, is this true? Alamalo, is this true? It is a problem. We have a problem. We have a klal in this Gemara, in this Masechta. If you tell me, if we allow you to do chalitza, so then you're going to think, oh, just like the fact that I'm going to do chalitza, so therefore it must be if I want to do akdu yibam. We know over here you can't do yibam. So the Gemara says, "Kedim makom mitzvah hu hasira sarah shlam makom mitzvah shari yom shuhaki tana." The Gemara gives a new answer. The whole reason that Sarah is asura, the Sarah is the rival wife of your deceased brother. It's only when it's a rival wife of your deceased brother. Makom mitzvah. Only it's a mitzvah even when it's your brother's wife. Let's say it was your daughter was married to some other man, not your brother, right? So her Sarah, right? So this other man is married to your daughter, and he dies, and he has a rival wife also. He has a second wife, so there's no problem of marrying his Sarah. You can marry your daughter-in-law, your daughter's Sarah, because it's not makom eshazach. That's why it says potros. It says potros to tell me there's a ptur unique only in a case where there's a mitzvah of, where there's a chiyuv, where there's a mitzvah of yibum. So then it says poter, there's no mitzvah of ptur. It's lashon by mitzvah. My year the tani min achalitza min yibum. Why did it say chabot your poter min achalitza min yibum? Listening min yibum lechudei. Just say poter from yibum. Itana min yibum. I mean mechatz chalza. Yivum lo miyabma. If we just said min yibum, I would think that you could do chalitza. You can't do yibum. We know kamash malan kol yibum el chalitza kol shein el yibum el chalitza. If there's no mitzvah of yibum, there's also no mitzvah of chalitza. Kol shein el yibum el chalitza. Listening min yibum min chalitza. Say why does it say min chalitza min yibum? First chalitza then yibum. Say min yibum min chalitza. You don't mean min chalitza lechudo. Just say min chalitza. Abba Shol, it must be Abba Shol. The hour Ms. Chalitza says Yibam wanted to tell you, the Tana wanted to tell you who, to reveal who it is. It's Abba Shol's opinion. It says Min Chalitza Min Yibam, tell you that really in a regular case where there's no Isser Erva, you have an option of doing Yibam or Chalitza, and nowadays this Abba Shol is relevant. We pass like Abba Shol to a certain extent. That he says Min Chalitza Min Yibam, the first option, the better option is do Chalitza because we're choshesh that a person doesn't have the right intention when he's Boel. The Yevamos. So therefore, he said do chalitza, don't do yibum. That's why it says chalitza first. There's the Midyan the Reish Lamutei. On the Sefer Lamutei, it says in the Mishnah, it goes out of its way to say 15, right? You counted it. You count up the cases, it would be 15. Why do I say Chamesh Rei Nashim Potros? And it says Ve'elu, and it says V'these also. On the Sefer Lamutei, these again is enumerating basically a second time the 15 arayas. So what is it coming to exclude? There's two exclusions in the Mishnah that tell you that there's two cases where you would have thought it applied the concept of Mishnah. The Sarah is also ptur, and the Sarah is really muteres. The Mishnah is the Rav with the Ravasi. The case of Rav and Ravasi. What is the case of Rav and Ravasi? The case of Rav and Ravasi. Rav's case is about a sota, and Ravasi's case is about an islandness. Meaning, let's say your brother is married to two wives. He doesn't have any children. Your brother, one of his wives becomes a sota. Sota again, and she's suspected of adultery, right? She confined herself with a man even after they warned her, and now she has yet to drink the Mei Mara, the Mei Sota, to find out whether she's a Sota. So therefore, she's considered as din of a Sota. So just like you can't do Yibam, you can't marry a Sota. Sota's Asura Labal, but she can't marry anybody, a Sota. Bia of the Sota is Asura. So therefore, Rav says also that the Sarah is also Ptura min Yibam, the Sarah of the Sota, the second wife of the brother, of the deceased brother. Rav Asi says that all the Sarah is also Ptura by an islandess. If you decide to marry, your brother decided to marry an islandess, and it was a good marriage, he knew she was marrying someone incapable of reproduction, of having children, and he decided to marry her anyway. And then he has another rival wife, and he dies. So therefore, just like the islandess is Ptura, the Sarah is Ptura according to Rav Asi, our mission is coming to exclude, to say not like Rav, not like Rav Asi, that really the Sarah in both cases is muteres by the Sota and by the islandess. So the Gemara says, if they hold of each other, sorry, the Rav Rasi. According to Rav Rasi, according to Rav Rasi, who hold the Sarah's Ptura both in Sota and islandess. So what did they hold? The Mishnah is coming to exclude. So if they hold of each other's Ptur, they both agree, right? They just mention, each one mentioned a particular case, but they both agree on both situations, both by the Sota and both by the island is chad lemute saras menes. Chad lemute saras machzir grusha. So one exclusion in the Mishnah is talk about a mima'enes. A mima'enes, we said again, is a woman who, when she becomes a gedola, she's married by her brother or mother, and she becomes a gedola. She only has nisun derabanan. She's a mima'en. She decides she doesn't want to marry the guy. So therefore, even though she is pater min hayibum, she's chayv min hayibum on the right level, but midrabanan she has to do chalitza. But her sarah is not patur. You could marry the sarah. Chad lemute sarah machzir grusha. So again, if you go ahead and you divorce your wife, your brother is married to a woman and he's machzir grusha, so he divorces her and then he brings her back by machzir grusha. So the sarah is not a patura. You're not allowed to marry the machzir grusha. So because once a machzir grusha marries somebody else, you're not allowed. It talks about she married. She went ahead. She was divorced by the second brother. And then she married somebody else, and then he went ahead and be Isser, and he married her again. So that's something he's not allowed to do. He's not allowed to be married to her. So and he has a Sarah, a rival wife. So therefore, they both fall in front of the Yavam. It doesn't positive that the Sarah is Muteris. If they only say by their own case, they don't agree with each other. One exclusion in the Mishnah is to mention the other case of his friend. So the second exclusion is to exclude either one of those two options. The Rabbi Ravasi listening to, according to Rabbi Ravasi, why does it say 17 cases in the Mishnah or 16 cases in the Mishnah? Why does it include their case? Even they agree, even though the Sarah is Ptura by a Sota and by an island, is the Sarah, meaning, again, if that Sarah went, the rival wife, she's Ptura, but she went and married another brother, a third brother, and then that third brother died, and that third brother had another Sarah, it doesn't pater the Sarah of the third brother. We'll see later in the Gemara why that is. But not immediately. So now the Gemara goes back to our Mishnah, the subject of our Mishnah. Where do we know this din in our Mishnah? That not only is sheep tour, the Erva is tour from Yibam, but also the Sarah. The Tana Rabbana, Isha, Lachosa, Litikach, Litzror, Legalis, Arbasa, Aleh, B'chayal. This is a pasuk in the Torah, I believe in Achrei Mos, which says that you can't marry your sister's wife, your wife's sister, you can't marry. It says in the word Aleha, Bechaya. Matam Aleha, Matam Alomar. Why does it say the word Aleha on top of her? It's to allude to the fact that the different pasuk by Yibam, the mitzvah of Yibam, Yevamo Yavo Aleha. He should be Boel on top of her. He should be with her, cohabit with her. Shomei Ani, I feel ba'achas mikol raya somewhere in the Torah. I would think it's talking about you can do Yibam even when there's an erva. The mitzvah of Yibam, mitzvah of Yibam is docha, kares or docha the iser. Never kan alev, never lahalan alev. Ma lahalan makom mitzvah. Just like over here, it's only where there's a mitzvah. Afkan b'makom mitzvah. We only say. Just like Yibam only applies with a mitzvah, if there's an Isser to do Yibam, because she's a Kares, so too, the Pasuk B'Achaz Isha is talking about, one second. Right. Just like by Yibam, there's only a mitzvah of doing a makom mitzvah, meaning where your brother dies childless. If your brother dies with children, there's no mitzvah. So too over here, by Achos Ishto, by the Achos Ishto, the sister of your wife, it only is a case where there's no Isser. There's an Isser, there's no mitzvah of Yibam. Amar Rachmana lo sikach. And the Torah says, so we learn that, just like it says, Aleh is talking about Makom mitzvah. Yom Aleh, a regular case of Yibam, the mitzvah of Yibam is when there's a mitzvah, meaning your brother dies, he's married to a woman, and they don't have children. So too, the case of Isha by marrying your sister's wife is talking about a case of Yibam. That's the Gzera Shava, talking about even a case of Yibam. But it has to be the makom mitzvah. Makom mitzvah means it's a case of Yibam. or your brother dies childless, and even then the Gemara, and that's why the pasuk says lo sikach, by your wife's sister. It says I don't know lo sikach. So the Torah says afal pikein, you still shouldn't marry. You shouldn't do yibum. I only know your wife's sister. So Rasaminayin, how do you know you can't even marry your wife's sister's Sarah? Talmud or Litzror. It says Litzror. It's a lashon of Sarah. It really means quarreling, but it also is a reference to Sarah. It sounds like Sarah, your rival wife. Ainli ella Sarasa. Sarah Sarasa. How do you know even if the Sarah goes and marries a third brother, right? And then her Sarah is also a Sarah. Talmud Lomar Litzror v'lo Latzor. Could say Latzor. The extra reish is telling me to exclude the Sarah afilu me'ador. I only know this Torah and Mishnah applies to your wife's sister. Shar arayas mina. How do you know there's no mitzvah of yibum even by other arayas? Amart ma'achos isha miyuchedes mamatzino. Mamatzino is a klal in the Torah. Just like we find, it's a logical rhetoric. Just like it applies in one case, we apply in another case. Ma'achos isha miyuchedes she erva v'chayavin al zadona kares v'ashkolas achatas. Just like Achos Isha, what's special about her? She's an erva. She's one of the arayas. And if you're cohabit with her, you're chayav kares. And b'shogeg you're chayav achata. So surely yavam. And she's also the yavam. We know that from the Zera Shava. Afkol she erva v'chayim al zeno kares v'ashkas achata asher liyavam. Must be asher to do yibum. Ve'enli ella hein. I only know the arayas saraseminai. And how do you know even the rival wives? Amar ma'achos Isha miyuchedes she erva v'chayim al zeno kares v'ashkas achatas. We also learned in the pasuk from Litzror that Sarah is also Asur. So similarly, any other case like this, the Sarah is going to be Asur. And that is the basis for the teaching in our Mishnah that not only the Erva but also the Sarah and the Sarah Potter in all the cases of Kares and worse. You might say that also in the case of 6 arayas which are worse. We're going to see Mishnah later on. I'm going to teach you about 6 cases where not only the erva applies to you, but it applies to your brother. Meaning your brother who dies without children is seemingly married, is forbidden to marry, but she's married to someone who's forbidden to, which are but. So you might think, and that woman falls to yibum to you. You might think that the tzara of that woman is also potter. Amar ma'achos isha miyuchedes she erva. So you say just like your wife's sister, she's an erva v'chayim al zon hakar sh'chas chatas v'efshal inase la'achim, and she could technically be married. Your wife's sister could. Your brother could marry your wife's sister. That's sort of liyavam. But she's also to the Yavam, and Sarasa Asura, and the Sarah is Asur. Af Kol Shehi Ero Chaim Al Donal Kar Lashas Chadas Efshali Nasa La'achim. Has to be someone who can be married to your brother. Asura Yavam Sarasa Asur Yatu Shesharayis Chamuris Meilo Holy Efshali Nasa La'achim. Sarah saying Mutaris, since they can't be married to your brothers, therefore the Sarah is mutter. You could do even with the Sarah. Shein Sarah Ela Ma'ach. There's only a Sarah only from a brother that is Mutar. Azhara Shamana. We only learned from this pasuk lo sikach that it's forbidden. There's an isser, a law of onish. I didn't know there's kares also. Amakra kikol asher yasem mikol tavos. At the end of the parsha, in when it sums up the whole parsha of Arayos, at the end of Achrei Mos, it says an inclusionary pasuk, where it says any of the Arayos you get kares for, to include that all these things, the punishment for all these things is kares. From there we learn it. I hope you enjoyed today's shir. Please like, subscribe, comments. We'll see you in the next year.